everyone. So today we will have a discussion on the topic adrenergic receptors. Adrenergic receptors, it's also called as adrenoceptors. So they are having the same meaning. The key point is that they work on adrenaline or noradrenaline, act as neurotransmitters. Okay. So this is the key point, is that they act as neurotransmitters. Now, these adrenergic receptors, the effect of catecholamines in central as well as peripheral nervous system, it is appeared to be mediated through interactions with this class of receptors, which is called as adrenergic receptors. We need to know what are catecholamines and all. So catecholamines, they are monoamine neurotransmitters. So catecholamines, they are the hormones which is produced by the adrenal gland. For example, like this. So this adrenal gland, during the stress condition, they will produce hormones called as catecholamines into our blood. Okay. So the gland sends this catecholamines into the blood when physically or emotionally stressed. That is, it responds when the body responds to the stress or fight conditions. That is adrenal gland, where we can see adrenal glands, we know it is situated. We prepare for a flight or fight conditions. In such a condition, the adrenal gland, which is situated above the kidney, on topmost part of the kidney, during this stress condition, it will release the catecholamines into our blood, and then the body's homeostasis will be maintained. Our body regulates into the normal condition. Okay, so that is all about catecholamines. Now let's discuss few examples of catecholamines. Few examples. What are the examples of catecholamines? So we have dopamine. Dopamine is an example of dopamine. We have examples of catecholamines are dopamine, we have norepinephrine and epinephrine. Like the biosynthesis of dopamine after dopamine. So dopamine is the first catecholamine which is synthesized by DOPA. So DOPA synthesizes one of the first catecholamines, which is dopamine. Dopamine is the first catecholamine synthesized by DOPA, and then in turn norepinephrine and epinephrine are derived by metabolic modification of dopamine. By metabolic modification, this is actually by the biosynthesis we get like from dopamine we get epinephrine or norepinephrine. So let's just very quickly discuss just the structures about these. So dopamine, you know what's the structure about, how is this structure? Okay, so I think you get the structure. So this is the structure of dopamine, this is the structure of norepinephrine, and this is the structure of epinephrine. So as we have studied earlier, like by biosynthesis of dopamine is the first catecholamine which is first catecholamines which is biosynthesized from DOPA, and by the metabolic modification further we get epinephrine as well as norepinephrine. The structure of dopamine is this. Epinephrine and epinephrine, we have this OH here, OH, but this is devoid of that OH group. Okay, now difference between these norepinephrine and epinephrine is that in epinephrine, which is this structure, in epinephrine, it has a methyl group which is attached to the nitrogen. Okay, it is attached to this nitrogen. Whereas in norepinephrine, the methyl group is replaced by a hydrogen. Like here, if you are just simplifying, it will be NH, you know. So this NH. So here this methyl group, it is replaced by another hydrogen, so it becomes NH2. So I think you got it. So yeah, that was what we were discussing. I think you got the structures. So here the methyl group is attached to the nitrogen. Here in norepinephrine, the hydrogen is the methyl group is actually replaced by another hydrogen. Okay, so that is what was the examples of catecholamines. They were dopamine, norepinephrine and epinephrine. And maybe you know, you have heard like norepinephrine is also called as noradrenaline. No confusion regarding the terms. Like adrenergic receptors are called as also called as adrenoceptors. Then norepinephrine is also called as noradrenaline. Everything is the same. Okay. Yeah, so now that we have discussed about catecholamines is because what does catecholamines is related to adrenergic receptors is that during this stress conditions, catecholamines, that is, it can be dopamine, epinephrine or norepinephrine, is released into the blood, and further the body's hemostasis is controlled, like the fear fright condition comes back to its normal state. So let's just go to the adrenergic receptors, that is those definitions. So adrenergic receptors, they are the class of G protein coupled receptors. So what will be this G protein coupled receptors? They are the protein. So G protein, so they are proteins which is located in the cell membranes. So if like this is the cell, for example, just this is the cell. Now these GPCRs, they are located on the cell membranes. So like if this is the protein, now they are located on the cell membrane that binds the extracellular substance. So some extracellular substance is there. When it comes here, it binds with the extracellular substance and transmit the signals from these substance. So it transmit these signals from these substance towards where? To the intracellular molecule. So if there is an intracellular molecule, transmit it transmitted signals from extracellular substance to the intracellular molecule. So that is G protein. So I think, hope you are clear. So this is the they are the GPCRs. They are the G protein coupled receptors, which you can see on the cell membrane. And what they do is that they bind with the extracellular substance that is outside the cell and transmit the signals from this substance to the inside of the cell, or substance which is present inside of the cell. This is how this G protein coupled receptors work. Now G protein coupled, what the G stands for? They are guanine. So it's called as guanine nucleotide binding protein. So guanine nucleotide binding protein. So adrenergic receptors, they are the class of GPCRs, and they are the targets of catecholamines. So adrenergic receptors, meaning they are the class of GPCRs or G protein coupled receptors, and this G protein coupled receptors, they are guanine nucleotide binding protein, and this adrenergic receptors, they target our catecholamines. Now which are the catecholamines? The noradrenaline and adrenaline, or we call it norepinephrine and epinephrine, and they are produced by the body. So we know the catecholamines which is produced by the body, and medication which is beta blockers, beta 2 agonist, alpha 2 agonist for the treatment of high blood pressure as well as asthma. For these treatment of this high blood pressure and asthma, so these medications we use. So beta blockers, we know the name of beta blocker is adrenergic. The medications, that is beta blockers, beta 2 agonist and alpha 2 agonist, they treat these three of these medications. They are used for the treatment of high blood pressure and asthma. So coming in detail about beta blockers, they are also called as beta adrenergic blocking agent. Examples is azibutrolol, atenolol and bisoprolol. Now beta 2 agonist. So beta 2 agonist, they are also called as adrenergic agonist, which block the beta 2 bronchodilator in order for the treatment of asthma. And there is a special kind of SABAS, that is beta coming under the beta 2 agonist, is short acting beta agonist is that. Short acting beta agonists, they provide quick relief of asthma symptoms. So if you are having a very painful asthma symptoms, they provide quick relief. And these beta agonists are usually provided before the exercise. Why? Because in order to prevent exercise induced there is another bronchospasm or bronchoconstriction takes place. In order to prevent that exercise induced bronchoconstriction, we usually prescribe this beta agonist before your exercise. An example is albuterol. Okay. Now coming to alpha 2 agonist. Alpha 2 agonist, it is to treat the hypertension, then severe cancer pain, and examples is clonidine, methyl dopa. Okay, so these 3 medications are used to treat high blood pressure and asthma. Okay, now coming back to the adrenergic receptors. So many cells in our body, they have the receptors, and for binding of a catecholamine to a receptor, they stimulate the sympathetic nervous system. Like many cells have got, if this is a cell, they have got the receptors in those cells, and these receptors, they bind to the catecholamine. That is, a receptor bind to the, or we can say binding of catecholamine to a receptors, and it can stimulate our SNS. So SNS is one of the main division of autonomic nervous system. Like just roughly speaking about autonomic nervous system, ANS, it is classified into sympathetic nervous system as well as parasympathetic nervous system. Now what is sympathetic nervous system? Sympathetic nervous system is responsible for how the body reacts to danger, and it is responsible for flight reactions. This is responsible for flight and fight response. Peripheral nervous system is responsible for maintaining the homeostasis. So that is how our body built in the stability monitor. So back to the normal condition, or the body undergoes stabilization. So as we have discussed is that when receptors, when catecholamines bind to the receptors, which is found in many cells, this can stimulate what? It can stimulate the SNS. And this was just I gave you a short in just to know what is this SNS and PNH. Now this is what we are discussing, like when the SNS is being stimulated, response causal dilates. Okay, so because of the stimulation of SNS during the flight or flight condition, what all responses our body has is that the pupil dilates. It dilates. Because of it, we have high heart rate, and the energy starts to mobilize. And blood flow dilates from non-essential organs to skeletal muscle, because right now, what is the condition? We have to run. Like if it is like we fear of something, automatically we have a tendency to run. So blood flow needs to be from the non-essential organs to skeletal muscle. Every blood flow now is centered to skeletal muscle. So automatically what happens is that these effects, or these responses, these totally, what is the outcome is that our physical performance increases. Our physical performance is increased momentarily. That is how the stimulation of SNS take place, or this is how a body reacts to fright as well as flight conditions. So physical performance increases momentarily. So now we have discussed about catecholamines, the definition of everything regarding that. Now the main topic is adrenergic receptors, like how the class of adrenergic receptors is divided into. So adrenergic receptors, I'm just taking it as our adrenergic receptors. It is actually, let us just discuss about the adrenergic receptors, the class of adrenergic receptors. So adrenergic receptors, they are basically divided into 2 classes, or they have major 2 classes, which is alpha receptors and beta receptors. So as we have earlier studied, the effect of catecholamines in central and peripheral nervous system, it is mediated through the interaction of major classes of receptors, which is alpha receptors and beta receptors. And alpha receptors, they are actually divided into 2. We have alpha 1 receptors and alpha 2 receptors. These are G protein coupled receptors, or GPCRs, which we have earlier discussed. And beta receptors actually divided into 3. We have beta 1 receptor, beta 2 receptors, and beta 3 adrenergic receptors. Now let's discuss the location and what's the function of alpha receptors as well as beta receptors. Okay, so alpha 1 receptors. So alpha 1 receptors, it is this, like this is presynaptic, and then we have postsynaptic. So it is a postsynaptic alpha receptor, and it is found in the vascular smooth muscle. So in the blood vessel, the smooth muscles, we can see these alpha 1 receptors, and they determine the arteriolar resistance and venous capacitance, and thus they regulate the blood pressure. So they can regulate the blood pressure by determining the arteriolar resistance and venous capacitance. Now alpha 2 receptors, which we find on our brain, which is found on our brain and periphery, and in the brain they modulate, in the brain system they can modulate our outflow. So they are usually found in the brain and periphery. Alpha 1 receptors is found in the vascular smooth muscles, and alpha 2 receptors we can find in brain and periphery. And what they do is that they inhibit the sympathetic activity and they lower the blood pressure. Like sympathetic activity is inhibited and conditionally our blood pressure is lowered. That is what we have discussed about alpha 1 receptors, is like it determine the arterial resistance and venous capacitance. For those who didn't understood this arteriolar resistance and venous capacitance, I will just show you. That is arteriolar resistance meaning like what is this arterial constriction? Do you know what is arterial constriction? So when arterial constriction takes place, there will be increase in the resistance of a blood flow. Then there will be decrease in the blood flow to the capillary. So that is, we know, decrease in blood flow to the downward capillaries, and largely this can decrease our blood pressure. So this is the constriction of arterial constriction. And what is arteriolar dilation? In arterial dilation, what takes place is that there will be decrease in resistance and increase in, that is the reverse takes place, increase in blood flow to downward capillaries and smaller decrease in blood pressure. So earlier we knew, like they determine the arterial resistance and the venous capacitance, and they can finally determine blood pressure. So this is how the arteriolar resistance takes place. Arteriolar resistance, this is how it takes place. So I hope you understand, like the arterial constriction and arterial dilation. And arterial constriction, increase in the resistance. Hope you understood about the arteriolar resistance, that is the arterial constriction takes place, arterial dilation takes place, and these are the things what happen. And finally the venous capacitance also, I think we have discussed, I think you have understood. Now, so since we have discussed the adrenergic receptors, the alpha receptors, we are moving on to the beta receptors. So beta 1, beta 2 and beta 3. In beta 1 it's mainly heart and kidney, and here there is increase in the heart rate and increase in the heart strength of contraction and contractility. So finally the heart rate is increased and the heart strength for contractility and contraction is increased. So beta 2 receptors, it is found in the bronchioles of lungs, in the arteries of skeletal muscle, then gastrointestinal tract, and the liver, uterus, vascular smooth muscles. These are the location. And beta 2 receptors also increases the heart rate and cardiac contractility, like so. Here, like same as that of beta 1 adrenergic receptors. Now beta 3 receptors, they are found in the gallbladder, urinary bladder, in brown adipose tissue. Like brown fat is also called as brown adipose tissue. So here I'll write just BAT. So BAT stores energy in smaller space than brown white fat. Why it is called as brown? Because it is packed with iron which is rich in mitochondria. This brown adipose tissue, it is packed with iron which is rich in mitochondria. So it is called as brown, or it appears to be brown in color. Like thermogenesis here means when brown fat burns. When brown fat burns, it produces heat without shivering. So that's that. So finally, in urinary bladder, beta 3 receptors causes the relaxation of the bladder and prevention of urination. So this is how the alpha receptors and beta receptors work. So we have just covered the topic of adrenergic receptors, alpha receptors as well as beta receptors. So beta 1 receptors, their location and function, I hope it's clear. So thank you for listening, and do comment, subscribe. If you have any doubts, you can comment. Do like, share and subscribe. Thank you all. I hope you understood.